My name is Liana Romano. I was 21 years old, stubborn enough to believe that hard work could still change a person's future. While most of my classmates spent weekends relaxing, I spent mine inside engineering labs, repairing discarded equipment, testing prototypes, and chasing an idea that had lived in my head since I was a little girl. I wanted to become an engineer. Not because I dreamed about a six-figure salary. Not because I wanted people to admire me. I wanted to design affordable clean water systems for communities that had been forgotten by everyone else. That dream became the reason I woke up every morning. It also became the reason my own parents slowly stopped believing in me. Before I tell you how everything fell apart, there is someone you need to know. His name was Draven Croswell. To the public, he was a respected entrepreneur, the founder of one of the country's most famous innovation foundations, and a man who proudly claimed he was helping young inventors build better futures. Every television interview made him look generous. Every newspaper praised his investments in education. Every university wanted him as a guest speaker. People admired him. I would eventually learn that public reputation and private ambition were two completely different things. At that time, however, I had never met him. I was too busy fighting a battle inside my own home. It started quietly. One evening, after another long day at the university laboratory, I carried my backpack into the kitchen. My mother barely looked up from preparing dinner. "You're home late again," she said. I had to finish testing the filtration unit. She sighed without asking how it went. My father folded his newspaper and looked directly at me. "Liana," he said, "how much longer are you going to waste your life on this engineering fantasy?" His words landed harder than I expected. "It's not a fantasy," I answered carefully. "I'm close to finishing my project." He shook his head. "Projects don't pay bills. I have scholarships. For now. I can earn research funding." "You keep talking about what might happen," he interrupted. "Real life doesn't work that way." The conversation ended there. Or, at least I thought it had. The next morning, my mother placed a brochure on the kitchen table. It advertised entry-level administrative jobs. "They're hiring," she said softly. "You should apply." I stared at the brochure before pushing it back toward her. I didn't spend years studying engineering just to quit before graduating. She looked disappointed. "We're trying to help you." It doesn't feel like help. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Every conversation somehow returned to the same subject. Engineering. Money. Reality. Failure. Eventually, my parents stopped arguing. Instead, they stopped asking about my classes. They stopped asking about my research. They stopped asking about me. The silence hurt more than the arguments. A month later, I packed my belongings into 2 suitcases and rented the smallest apartment I could afford near campus. The place wasn't impressive. The paint was peeling near the windows. The heater made strange noises every night. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person. But it was mine. For the first time in years, nobody questioned how I spent my evenings. I could study until sunrise if I wanted. I worked part-time repairing laptops and small appliances for students and local businesses. Every dollar paid my rent, bought groceries, or went directly into purchasing parts for my prototype. Life became exhausting. Some nights, I wondered whether my parents had been right. Maybe I was chasing something impossible. Then I would return to the laboratory. The moment I saw clean water flowing through the newest version of my filtration system, every doubt disappeared. That single moment reminded me why I had started. One chilly Monday morning, our engineering department gathered every student inside the main lecture hall. Professor Elaine Mercer stood at the front with an excitement I had never seen before. "I have good news," she announced. "This year's National Engineering Innovation Showcase will be hosted in Chicago." The room immediately filled with whispers. "This competition isn't just another student exhibition," Professor Mercer continued. "Industry leaders, nonprofit organizations, research institutions, and investors will all be attending. The winning projects will receive full development grants." My heart began racing. A development grant would solve every financial problem I had. More importantly, it would allow my clean water system to become something real. As students left the lecture hall discussing their ideas, I remained seated for a moment, imagining what life could become if everything finally went right. I had no idea that somewhere beyond my university campus, someone had already built an entire career by taking brilliant ideas away from students exactly like me. And before long, that person would notice mine. The announcement changed everything. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about my parents' disappointment or my empty bank account. I was thinking about Chicago. Every student in the engineering department suddenly became obsessed with the National Engineering Innovation Showcase. Laboratories stayed open later than usual. Hallways echoed with conversations about prototypes, presentations, and impossible deadlines. I threw myself into my work. Every morning began before sunrise. Every night ended long after the campus security guards reminded everyone the building was closing. The prototype slowly transformed from a rough concept into a working machine. It wasn't beautiful. The outer frame was scratched from constant adjustments. Several components had been recycled from broken equipment I had repaired over the previous year. But it worked. Watching cloudy water pass through the filtration system and come out crystal clear never stopped amazing me. Professor Elaine Mercer noticed my progress. One afternoon, she walked around my workstation while I calibrated the pressure sensors. "You've improved the efficiency again," she said. "I found a cheaper membrane material." She smiled. "Most students focus on making something impressive. You're focused on making something people can actually afford. That's the whole point." She nodded slowly. "Keep going, Liana. You're closer than you think." Those words stayed with me. For the next several weeks, I barely had a social life. My apartment became nothing more than a place to shower and sleep. The laboratory became home. Sometimes I forgot to eat until another student reminded me. Other times I fell asleep at my desk with engineering drawings scattered around my laptop. It was exhausting, but every sacrifice felt worthwhile. Finally, the university selected its finalists. When Professor Mercer posted the list outside her office, dozens of students crowded around the bulletin board. My hands trembled as I searched for my name. There it was. Liana Romano. I had officially qualified for the National Engineering Innovation Showcase. I couldn't stop smiling. I wanted to call my parents. I even picked up my phone. But after staring at their contact names for nearly a minute, I quietly put the phone back into my pocket. Maybe I would call them after I won something. Maybe then they would understand. 2 weeks later, I arrived in Chicago. The convention center was unlike anything I had ever seen. Hundreds of booths stretched across enormous exhibition halls. Robotics, medical technology, renewable energy, artificial intelligence. Students from universities across the country were making final adjustments to inventions they had spent years creating. The atmosphere was electric. Everyone looked nervous. Everyone looked hopeful. I carefully assembled my display, connected the filtration system, and tested every component one last time. Everything worked perfectly. As visitors slowly entered the exhibition hall, judges moved from booth to booth asking technical questions. Some asked about manufacturing costs. Others focused on environmental impact. I answered every question as honestly as I could. Several nonprofit representatives seemed genuinely interested. One even asked whether my design could be adapted for disaster relief zones. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine that my project might actually change lives. Late that afternoon, a sudden wave of whispers spread across the exhibition floor. People straightened their jackets. Professors stood a little taller. Students began checking their displays one more time. Someone important had arrived. A tall man wearing a tailored navy suit entered the hall surrounded by several assistants. His confident smile seemed permanently attached to his face. Even before anyone said his name, I recognized him from television interviews. Draven Croswell, founder of the Croswell Innovation Foundation, investor, philanthropist, the man universities celebrated as one of the country's biggest supporters of young inventors. He moved calmly from booth to booth, speaking with students as photographers followed behind him. Every conversation looked effortless. He complimented ideas, shook hands, laughed naturally. He knew exactly how to make people feel seen. Eventually, he stopped in front of my booth. His eyes settled on the filtration system. "This is yours?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He leaned closer to examine the prototype. Walk me through it. For nearly 15 minutes, he listened while I explained every design choice, every engineering challenge, and every cost-saving modification. Unlike some judges, he didn't interrupt. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions. Questions that made me believe he truly understood the technology. When I finished, he remained silent for a few seconds. Then he smiled. This has tremendous potential. My heart nearly stopped. Thank you. Who financed your research? I did, mostly. Scholarships and part-time work. He looked genuinely surprised. You built this with almost no financial backing? I did. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a business card. The black lettering reflected beneath the exhibition lights. Draven Crosswell, founder. Crosswell Innovation Foundation. I'd like my team to review your project after the showcase, he said. We're always looking for innovators who solve real problems. I stared at the card. I'd be honored. He gave a polite nod before continuing toward the next booth. As soon as he disappeared into the crowd, several nearby students looked at me with open envy. Do you know how rare that is? One of them whispered. I've never seen him hand anyone his personal card. Another student laughed. You might have just landed the opportunity of a lifetime. I believed them. That evening, I walked back to my hotel carrying more hope than I had felt in years. I placed Draven's business card carefully inside my notebook before going to sleep. I had no idea that the same conversation filling me with optimism had already sealed my place inside a game I didn't even know existed. Because somewhere else inside that convention center, someone was already deciding how to make sure my invention would never truly belong to me. 3 days after returning from Chicago, I walked into the engineering department expecting to prepare for the final judging process. Instead, I was greeted by silence. Students standing outside Professor Mercer's office stopped talking the moment they saw me. Some looked uncomfortable. Others refused to make eye contact. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. I knocked on Professor Mercer's door. Come in. The moment I entered, I knew something was wrong. She wasn't alone. A university administrator sat beside her with a thick folder resting on the desk. Both of them looked far more serious than usual. Please have a seat, Liana. Nobody ever says those words before delivering good news. I sat down anyway. Professor Mercer folded her hands. I'm afraid we've received a formal complaint regarding your project. I frowned. A complaint? The administrator opened the folder. This morning, our office received legal documents claiming that portions of your filtration system belong to a privately owned research portfolio. For a moment, I honestly thought they had confused me with another student. I'm sorry, what? The complaint alleges that your design closely matches proprietary engineering work already registered by another organization. That's impossible. The administrator slid several printed diagrams across the desk. They've submitted supporting documentation. I looked at the drawings. The diagrams resembled my work. The layout was similar. Several technical descriptions matched ideas I had developed over the last 2 years. But something felt wrong. Tiny details were different. Materials had been changed. Measurements had been adjusted. It looked like someone had copied my project and then altered just enough information to make it appear older than mine. I've never seen these documents before, I said. Professor Mercer believed me. I could see it in her eyes. Unfortunately, belief wasn't enough. The university has to investigate, she said quietly. Until the review is complete, your project has been suspended from the competition. The words echoed inside my head. Suspended. Not rejected. Not cleared. Just frozen. Everything I had worked towards suddenly stopped moving. When will the investigation finish? I asked. We don't know. But the national judging starts next week. The administrator lowered his eyes. I understand. No. He didn't. If the investigation lasted another week, the competition would end without me. By the time anyone proved my innocence, the opportunity would already be gone. I left the office carrying the folder they had allowed me to copy. Outside, the campus suddenly felt unfamiliar. Students hurried between classes. Cars passed along the street. Life continued exactly as it always had. Mine didn't. Back in my apartment, I spread every page across the kitchen table. There had to be something I was missing. Every date, every signature, every technical drawing. The paperwork looked authentic. Too authentic. Someone had invested an incredible amount of effort creating this accusation. That realization frightened me more than the accusation itself. This wasn't random. Someone wanted my project removed. But why? Late that evening, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. Hello? Miss Romano? Yes. My name is Daniel Pierce. I'm calling on behalf of the Crosswell Innovation Foundation. My heartbeat quickened. We've heard about the unfortunate situation. I remained silent. We know this must be stressful. It is. Our foundation understands that legal disputes can become expensive. His voice remained calm, professional, almost rehearsed. If your design eventually becomes difficult to commercialize, Mr. Crosswell may still be interested in discussing other opportunities. What kind of opportunities? You've demonstrated remarkable engineering talent. He paused. Sometimes it's easier to begin a new project than continue fighting over an old one. Something about that sentence bothered me. It sounded less like encouragement and more like advice. Advice I had never asked for. I appreciate the call, I replied carefully, but I haven't done anything wrong. Of course. I intend to prove that. I'm sure you do. His tone never changed. We simply wanted you to know that our doors remain open. The call ended. I stared at my phone for several seconds. The timing was impossible to ignore. Only hours after my suspension, Crosswell's foundation somehow already knew. Maybe that wasn't unusual. Maybe news traveled quickly during national competitions. Or maybe there was another explanation. I couldn't prove anything. Not yet. The next morning, exhausted and unable to think clearly, I drove to the only place that had ever helped me find peace. My grandmother's house. She opened the front door before I even knocked. One look at my face was enough. Without asking a single question, she wrapped her arms around me. We sat together in her small kitchen while she poured 2 cups of tea. Only after several quiet minutes did she finally speak. So, what happened? I told her everything. The competition, the accusation, the documents, the phone call. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't immediately offer advice. Instead, she asked one simple question. Liana, who benefits if your invention disappears? I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out, because for the first time, I realized I had been asking the wrong question all along. Grandma's question refused to leave my mind. Who benefits if your invention disappears? I repeated those words during the entire drive back to my apartment. Until then, I had been trying to prove my innocence. I hadn't stopped to ask who had something to gain from making me look guilty. The answer seemed obvious. The company listed in the legal complaint. But another question quickly followed. Why would an established organization care about a university student's prototype? The numbers didn't make sense. Unless my project was worth far more than I realized. The following afternoon, I returned to Grandma's house carrying copies of every document the university had given me. She spread the papers across her dining table and adjusted her reading glasses. I'm not an engineer, she said with a small smile, but I spent 30 years filing paperwork. Sometimes the paperwork tells a story people don't notice. She examined every page carefully. Dates, company names, registration numbers, official stamps. Then she stopped. This logo. She tapped one corner of the documents. It looks familiar. You've seen it before? I think so. She stood up, walked toward an old wooden cabinet, and pulled out a dusty storage box filled with photographs, notebooks, and retirement documents. After several minutes of searching, she found an old employee identification card. The company logo matched. My eyes widened. You worked there? Not exactly. She smiled. It was called something else when I worked there. Years later, it was acquired. Acquired by who? She looked directly at me. Crosswell Industries. A chill ran through my body. Grandma had never mentioned where she worked before retiring. It had simply never come up. I was an administrative assistant, she continued. I wasn't important enough to attend executive meetings, but I processed plenty of internal paperwork. Did you ever meet Draven Crosswell? A few times. What was he like? She hesitated. In public, charming. And in private? He hated competition. That answer stayed with me. Grandma reached for an old address book. I don't know if he's still there. Who? A former records supervisor named Arthur Bell. She flipped through yellowed pages until she found a phone number. It probably doesn't work anymore. To our surprise, it did. Arthur answered after the fourth ring. Grandma introduced herself. There was a long silence. Then he laughed. I haven't heard that name in almost 20 years. Grandma briefly explained my situation. Arthur became serious. I don't think this conversation belongs on the phone. We agreed to meet the following morning at a quiet neighborhood cafe. I barely slept that night. The next day, Arthur arrived carrying a worn leather briefcase. He looked to be in his late 70s, but his memory was remarkably sharp. After ordering coffee, he listened as I explained everything from the beginning. He never interrupted. When I finished, he slowly opened the briefcase. Inside were several folders. I kept these after I retired, he said. They're not confidential anymore, but I always believed someone might need them someday. He slid one folder across the table. It contained old corporate policy summaries. Another folder listed acquisition strategies. Then he showed me something completely unexpected. An internal presentation discussing university innovation partnerships. One sentence caught my attention immediately. Early technical visibility provides strategic commercial advantage. I frowned. What does that mean? Arthur sighed. Years ago, executives realized something. What? The cheapest research department in the world wasn't inside the company. It was inside universities. I stared at him. They didn't have to invent everything themselves. He nodded. If students voluntarily displayed breakthrough ideas before filing proper protections, companies could study market trends without spending millions on early research. My stomach tightened. But studying ideas isn't illegal. No. Stealing them is. Arthur leaned forward. I'm not accusing anyone of stealing your invention. He chose every word carefully. I'm saying that some executives became very interested whenever student projects looked commercially valuable. Was Draven involved? Arthur didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward Grandma. Then back at me. I retired before certain decisions were made. Then why meet us? He reached into the briefcase one last time. This time, he removed a folded sheet of paper. I recently heard rumors from former colleagues. What kind of rumors? Someone inside Crosswell Industries has been collecting documents. For what? In case the truth ever needed to come out. My heartbeat quickened. Who? I don't know. But if those rumors are true... He carefully pushed the paper toward me. Written across it was nothing more than a secure email address. No name. No explanation. Just this. Arthur stood up from the table. I've said enough. Before leaving, he looked directly at me. If someone contacts you through that address, read everything. But trust nothing until you verify it. He walked out of the cafe without looking back. I picked up the paper with trembling hands. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even a promise. But for the first time since my suspension, it felt like someone inside Draven Crosswell's own world might already be preparing to bring his carefully built empire crashing down. I stared at the email address for nearly an hour before deciding what to do. It could have been a trap. It could have been fake. Or it could have been the only chance I had left. I created a brand new email account using a public library computer instead of my personal laptop. If someone was watching me, I didn't want to make their job easy. My message contained only one sentence. Arthur Bell told me you might have information. Then I waited.
Nothing happened that day.
Nothing happened the next morning. By the second evening, I convinced myself the address was useless. Just as I was about to close my inbox, a new message appeared. There was no greeting, no signature, only one sentence. Check the locker at Union Station. Locker 214. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. That was all. The next morning, I arrived 20 minutes early. Union Station was crowded with travelers dragging suitcases across polished floors. People hurried in every direction. No one paid attention to me. At exactly 10 o'clock, I found locker 214. It required a 4-digit code. For a moment, panic set in. Then I noticed another email arriving on my phone. 1947. I entered the numbers. The lock clicked open. Inside was a plain brown envelope and a small portable hard drive. No note. No explanation. I left immediately. Instead of going home, I drove straight to Grandma's house. We connected the hard drive to an old computer that wasn't linked to the internet. Hundreds of files appeared on the screen. Internal emails, board meeting summaries, patent review reports, financial records. Everything was organized by date. The deeper we looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. Several student inventions from previous years looked painfully familiar. Each case followed nearly the same timeline. A student presented a promising idea. Weeks later, legal complications delayed the student's progress. Months after that, a company connected to Crosswell Industries released an almost identical product. Some students accepted small settlements because they couldn't afford lengthy legal battles. Others simply gave up. Their ideas disappeared into someone else's portfolio. I felt sick. This wasn't one mistake. It was a system. Then I found something even worse. An internal email chain discussed my project by name. My hands began shaking as I opened the messages. One executive wrote, "The Romano filtration concept has stronger nonprofit potential than expected." Another replied, "Delay public exposure until ownership concerns are established." The final response came from an executive assistant. "Mr. Crosswell has approved the recommended strategy." I read the sentence again.
And again.
It wasn't direct proof that Draven himself had written anything. But according to the email, he knew exactly what was happening. Grandma looked at me quietly. "We can't keep this to ourselves." "I know. We also can't post it online without verifying it." She was right. If even one document proved fake, everything else could be dismissed. I called Professor Mercer. She answered immediately.
"Liana?
"I need your help." An hour later, we met inside her office after campus had emptied for the evening. I showed her everything. She didn't speak for several minutes. Finally, she looked up. "If these files are authentic, they're huge. I don't know how to prove that." "I do." She reached for her phone. "Our university has worked with investigative journalists before. They specialize in corporate misconduct. If anyone can verify these documents, they can." Within 48 hours, the journalists assembled a team of digital forensic experts and attorneys. Every file was examined. Every email header was traced. Every timestamp was checked. Every document was compared with public corporate records. I barely slept while waiting for their conclusions. Finally, one of the lead investigators called us into a private conference room. He placed a thick report on the table. "We've completed our authentication." My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear him. "The files are genuine." No one spoke. The investigator continued. "These records establish a consistent internal strategy involving multiple student innovations over several years." Professor Mercer slowly leaned back in her chair. "So, this wasn't an isolated incident."
"No."
"It appears to have been repeated many times." The journalist closed the report. "We're publishing the investigation tomorrow morning." I swallowed hard. "What happens after that?" He met my eyes. "After that, the truth belongs to everyone." I thought the hardest part was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because, once the story became public, people who had stayed silent for years were finally ready to tell the world exactly what had been taken from them. The investigation was published at exactly 8 o'clock on a Monday morning. By noon, it was everywhere. National news channels interrupted their regular programming. Technology websites featured the story on their front pages. Universities across the country released public statements. The headlines spread faster than anyone expected. A respected innovation foundation was now being accused of systematically targeting student inventors. Then something remarkable happened. People who had remained silent for years finally stepped forward. One former engineering student described how her medical device prototype had disappeared after a legal dispute she could never afford to fight. Another inventor revealed that he had accepted a small settlement because he believed he had no other choice. A robotics team shared emails showing they had experienced delays almost identical to mine. The stories kept coming. Different universities, different inventions, the same pattern. Within days, government agencies announced formal investigations into Crosswell Industries and several affiliated companies. University partnerships were suspended. Corporate sponsors quietly withdrew their funding. Investors began selling their shares. For years, Draven Crosswell had carefully built the image of a visionary leader who invested in young talent. Now that image was collapsing one verified document at a time. His lawyers denied every allegation. His public relations team released carefully worded statements. None of it stopped the evidence. The documents spoke louder than press conferences ever could. A week later, I received another phone call from the university. This time, Professor Mercer sounded happier than I had heard in months. Liana, the independent review has officially concluded. I held my breath. Your project has been cleared. Every accusation had been dismissed. Every document used against me had been traced back to fraudulent filings connected to shell companies, now under investigation. My invention had always been mine. The National Engineering Innovation Showcase invited me back as a special participant. Standing inside that exhibition hall again felt completely different. Months earlier, I had arrived believing success depended on impressing powerful people. Now I understood something far more important. Real innovation deserved protection, not permission. When I presented my clean water filtration system for the second time, the applause meant more than any trophy could. People weren't celebrating because I had built a machine. They were celebrating because the truth had survived. Several nonprofit organizations approached me after the presentation. Unlike private investors, they weren't interested in buying my invention outright. They wanted to partner with me. Together, we developed affordable filtration systems for rural communities and disaster relief programs. The project I had once feared would disappear forever finally reached the people it had always been meant to serve. A few months later, I visited my parents. It was the first time we had shared dinner in almost a year. The conversation was awkward at first. Then my father quietly placed an old newspaper clipping beside my plate. It featured a photograph of me standing next to the finished filtration system. I was wrong, he admitted. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. He looked down at his hands. But I almost became part of it. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We should have believed in you. Their apology didn't erase the past. Some wounds take time to heal. But it was a beginning. The person I wanted to thank most wasn't sitting at that table. The next afternoon, I drove to Grandma's house. She was watering flowers in the front yard when I arrived. Without saying a word, I hugged her. She laughed softly. I take it everything worked out. It did. No, I corrected myself. You made sure it did. She shook her head. I didn't save your invention. She looked directly into my eyes. I only reminded you to ask the right question. That simple sentence stayed with me long after our conversation ended. Looking back now, I realize my parents weren't the greatest obstacle standing in the way of my dream.
Fear was.
The fear of failure. The fear of powerful people. The fear that telling the truth wouldn't matter. I learned that integrity is often tested long before it is rewarded. I also learned that one honest person asking one difficult question can expose a lie that hundreds of people were too afraid to challenge. And as for Draven Crosswell, his empire wasn't destroyed by revenge. It collapsed under the weight of its own deception. In the end, the invention people tried so hard to bury became the very reason their entire scheme was uncovered. If my story reminded you that persistence, honesty, and courage are always worth fighting for, I hope you'll carry that lesson with you. Thank you for spending your time with me and following my journey from beginning to end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know what part surprised you the most. Until next time, take care of yourself and never let anyone convince you that a meaningful dream is a waste of your future.